Hi, in this video I'm going to take a look at using the research log in a little bit more detail. I've had some questions on that, and it's going to be worth about the total of the two research logs on the final projects is 6 points. So I want to make sure you all know what we're looking for. And at the end of this video, I'm going to do a little review of KeyCite and Shepard's because a few people had asked about that as well. So you can stay tuned to the very end if you want a little review on that. So in terms of the research log, I think people are doing pretty well, but there are definitely a few things that I would look to include in the final project to make sure that you get full points. So the first section of the research log asks for your initial facts. People are doing well with this section. I'd say be careful to note some of the small facts too. For example, under jurisdiction, most people have noted Massachusetts, but it would have been better to also note the city. The reason for that would be if you have to determine the correct court later on, you would need to know what city it was in, and that way you have it right in your research log. Also, things like pulling out the key facts of the problems. This was a tenancy at will. Most people wrote this down in their initial facts, but then maybe lost track of it sometimes in the research, or that was the key fact in the research, and got a little bit sidetracked on lease provisions when we have a tenancy at will and it was specified in the facts. So this is an academic class, so read the facts carefully. We're trying to give you hints about what we're looking for, and as you do your research, you might want to refer back to the initial facts that you pulled out as being important. Okay, client goals, I think those look pretty good for what we've seen so far. The next section I really want to focus on is the research plan and search queries. So I would say a majority of the students are not being detailed enough in this section for us to follow what you're really doing with your research. So this section in particular, I think, is maybe going to be more detailed for the class than what you might end up using in practice, which is fine. But since this is a research class, we're looking to understand that you are using the research skills and sources that we've talked about in class. So the first thing that I would include, or somewhere in here I would include, are the search terms that you might use, that brainstorming process about the search terms. And so this is really broken into research plan, the brainstorming part where you're giving a lot of thought to what you're going to be looking at, thinking about your research strategy and giving us some idea of what that is. And then your search queries. So you're going to want to do the planning part first and write your notes on that before you actually run any searches. So another good section I like to see is, what are you thinking would be a good first source for this type of question? In this question, some kind of math-specific treatise on landlord-tenant law. Maybe you want to look at an MCLE. Maybe you want to go to the Mass Trial Court website. These are the kinds of things that you could put down as the first sources you might be looking for. Then I have a search plan. So I'm telling you, or I'm telling the instructors what I'm going to do. Well, first I know about the Mass Trial Court pages. It's a free source. I think they're likely to have material on landlord-tenant. I'm going to go there. I might run a Google search with my search terms. I know that I want to look for MCLE materials and that I can look at the entire table of contents a little bit better on Lexis, so I'm going to do that on Lexis, etc. Okay, so, and I'm going to post this for you so you can take a look at it. And this may be a little bit more detailed than yours was on this problem. That's fine. These are my own research notes, and I've also included some of the better things that I noticed in some of the student submissions as well. Okay, so the next section, after the brainstorming section where I'm telling you the plan, I give a little bit of detail about what the searches were that I ran. What site was I on? Did I use a browse method? What search terms did I use? Just a few little notes about what I'm doing and then the key sources that I found. I save the details of the key sources to the next section. Some people put it in this section, that's fine. You can play with the research log as long as it has the key sources of information. It doesn't have to be exactly in the format I've given you. Some people did tables, so they had the source on one side, and then the next column had where the source came from, and then another column with why it was important. That's fine if that works for you. just make sure that you're telling us what are the searches you ran very briefly, where the database was, what you found that was useful. Okay. And then I break it out so when I do my secondary sources, I list the sources themselves and why they're important. A couple of notes here. I like to know what the date is so I can tell currency. So this is something you should be noting for all your sources, is how current is it. When you take a look at a source, one of the things that tells you how helpful it might be is how current it is. Because if it's not very current, then you have to think about how much updating you're going to have to do independently. The reason I highlighted this MCLE source is a lot of people, and I think it's because of the way you're searching on Lexis and Westlaw, are giving one particular subsection, even for larger treatises that have multiple sections that could be helpful. So if I find a treatise that has lots of chapters and lots of subsections, I usually just make a note to myself that, you know what, this whole treatise is something that I'm probably going to want to be either browsing through the table of contents or searching within. So I note the different chapters I think are helpful. I note that there's more than one section that's helpful, okay? I've also included some forms here that I found. So I'm giving you, in the section above, I'm saying what the searches were that I used to find the secondary sources. And then in the secondary source section, I'm giving additional information about why the secondary sources are useful. The next section is going to be the key section for analysis for most problems, not all problems, but for most problems. And that's the primary binding authority section. So I just wanted to give a few examples here. I'm listing the different types of authority. I give a short note about why it's helpful. And then I'm also in the citation saying, for example, for the statutes, how current they are. This statute came right from Westlaw. The currency came right from Westlaw. This is what the currency is on Westlaw when I click on that currency link. So I just cut and pasted that in. Okay. And again, just some notes about the cases that I found and why they were helpful. In this problem, remember, we were only looking for statutes and cases. That's why there's no regulations, etc. So if I have persuasive authority, either because it's from a different jurisdiction or it's from a lower court or it's not reported, that kind of thing, I put that here. And then the final section is this wrap-up KeyCite Shepard section. And this one definitely a lot of people lost points on for some of the other problems, the first and second research problems. So I wanted to go over this before the final. So if you have a statute, so let's look at the statutes first, and there's pending or proposed legislation, you have to take a quick look at that legislation, run a search within, see if it's going to affect anything that has to do with your client's case, okay? So if there's pending or proposed legislation, you have to take a quick look to see what the legislation is about. If there's no proposed legislation, you're just going to note that. If you haven't noted the currency above of the database that you're in, you're going to want to note that here as well. If it's noted above, then obviously I don't need it in this section. For cases, if a case has been distinguished, you need just a short note about why you can still use it. So if it's distinguished, it's just distinguished. It's maybe not quite as important when it's yellow, but when it's red, if there's a red stop sign or flag and there's heavy negative treatment, you're definitely going to want to say why you can still rely on that case, okay? So by saying that, oh, I saw it was distinguished, I went and looked at the case, I know that you did the full updating for the case. So, and in this section, in addition to this KeyCite and Shepard's, I also put in, so if it's a procedural issue, I want to consider what court am I going to bring it in, depending on how the question is phrased to you from your, either the assignment we're giving you or your supervising attorney. And also any additional questions I might have for my client. So in this case, something like, had there been any communication at all between the landlord and tenant regarding the lead paint? That could be key. So I would definitely want to know something like that. Okay, so that's just a little overview of some things I noticed with the research log and how I think you could improve it for the final. So we're at 10 minutes now. Now I'm going to move into a little review of KeyCite and Shepard, so stay tuned if you want that review. Okay, so I'm starting on Westlaw and I'm key citing one of the statutes that was at issue in the landlord-tenant problem. And I just want to point out a few features when you're key citing a statute. So when you're in the document itself, one of the first things that I want you to look at is how current the document is. And this tells us how recently the database has been updated on Westlaw. And I can see that this database, all the statutes for the Massachusetts statutes, the Massachusetts General Laws Annotated, have been updated on Westlaw through Chapter 77, so Law 77, of the 2006 Second Annual Session. Okay, so that tells me how up to date the currency is for this database. The next thing I notice right away is there's a yellow flag. So there's some proposed legislation. So if I'm relying on this statute, I need to go in and look at this proposed legislation and see if it has any effect on my client's situation. On Westlaw, some of these tabs at the top, which we get with our KeyCite results, would be material that would be contained in the printed book. So this is when we're looking at statutes. So the notes of decision, those are the cases that the editors have chosen to include in the printed version of the statute, of the annotated statute. So let's take a quick look at the notes of decision. They're broken up by topic, which makes it really easy to find cases that are on point for your particular issue. So for example, one of the things that you might look at is the defenses section here, which is one of the ones that I looked at when I did this research. And one of the cases that I found that was particularly on point is this second one, Jablonski. So that's the way I could use the notes of decision chosen by the editors to find key cases that talk about statutes that govern in the area of law that I'm looking at. The other thing that's contained in the book version would be some of this history material, including the editors and revisers notes. It tells you changes that have been made to the statute and gives you like a little brief summary of why those changes have been made. There's also in here a link to one prior version of this statute. The next category of information from these tabs at the top that would be included in the print version would be the context and analysis. These are cross-references to other sections of the statute, some secondary material and practice aids that you would normally see in the Mass General Laws Annotated, the print version. So that's what those tabs are. The main tab, that's the Citing References tab, these are your KeyCite results. And so there might be some overlap between the cases here and those that are in the notes of decision, and there's going to be overlap as well with secondary sources that are mentioned here and some that are in the context and analysis. So you're getting additional citing references here besides the ones that just the editors have chosen. Okay, does that make sense? So let's click on that and take a quick look. So I'm just going to change my screen here one sec. Okay. So when I'm in the KeyCite results, which are these citing references when I'm in a statute, I get cases, statutes, regulations, secondary sources, lots of materials here. And I can see that in this very basic tab, when I just click on all the citing references, the thing that I get to narrow by is just a search within results, which can definitely be useful. I can put my search terms in here. But one thing I did want to point out to you is if you go to one particular category, for example, cases, then you have different ways to narrow based on the category of material you've chosen. So I chose cases, and you can see that now, in addition to the search within, I can narrow by jurisdiction. So I can pick just Massachusetts cases. I can narrow by date. I can narrow and say, do I care if they're in the notes of decisions, remembering that these are the ones chosen by the editors, etc. So sometimes it's helpful to narrow down when you choose citing references to narrow down to a particular category because you have more features then that you can use here. So that's my little tip for you on key citing the statute on Westlaw. Okay, let's take a look at the same statute on Lexis. Okay, I'm in the same statute on Lexis. And so the first thing that I think you'll notice here is that the currency information is right at the top. We don't have to click to a link. But you can see that on Lexis, we're only current through Act 69. So the 69th law that's been passed this year in Massachusetts. As you'll remember on Westlaw, it was current through the 77th law. You can see that we do have a similar feature showing us that there's pending legislation that we might want to take a look at. The next important feature I want to show you the difference of is that on Westlaw, when we're looking at the text of the statute, what we're getting in the document view is mostly just the text of the statute. And then if we want to see the editorial information that would be in the print version, it's across the top in those tabs that I discussed, at least some of those tabs. In Lexis, for statutes, that editorial material is at the bottom following the language of the statute. So here's the history. Here are the editor's notes that tell you the important amendments and give you a little summary about them. If we continue down, here are the case notes, so like the notes of decision on Westlaw. And we can also pick by topic and look at usually a lot of the same cases, although there will be differences. So those are the case notes, and if we kept going down, we'd also get secondary source material and research help. So on Westlaw, all those types of material are listed in tabs across the top. In Lexis for statute, it follows the text of the statute just like if you were looking in the book. So when we Shepardize a statute, we're going to use the Shepardize link here, Shepardize this document. Okay, and again, we're reminded there's pending legislation. The way that we narrow is over on the left, so it's very similar. And the first category of information we get are the citing decisions. So we don't get everything at once like we do on Westlaw. On Lexis, they're offering us first the citing decisions, and then the tools on the side. We have similar tools where we can search within with our keywords. We have a timeline where we can search by time, etc. If we want to see the other citing sources, which are secondary source materials, for example, that could be helpful, we would have to click on that tab. So don't forget that tab is there if you're looking for secondary source material. And then again, we can browse and see which sources are available to us. We can search within, that type of thing. Okay, so let's quickly look at cases, and we'll start on Lexis for cases. So again, for cases, I'm looking at a case that we used in the landlord-tenant problem, or that I had found in the landlord-tenant problem. And in this case, one thing right away we see right next to the title here, the citation, is that there's a yellow flag. So this is what we'd want to investigate. Why is there a yellow flag? We want to know why there's some negative treatment. There's no direct negative case history, but there is a case that causes us to be cautious. We know there's 24 citing decisions, and there's other secondary sources, etc., other citing sources. So let's look at the citing decisions first. And here, there's not too many citing decisions for this case. If you were looking at a U.S. Supreme Court case, then you definitely want to be using your tools on the left-hand side because there would be a lot to sift through. But we can look on the side and we can see which cases are giving that yellow flag, the caution, the distinguished by. We can limit by court. Again, we can limit by a particular headnote that's discussed in the case. And if you don't remember which headnote was of particular interest to you, you can click on this View Text of Headnotes, and it does give you the text of the headnotes. So you can limit in a couple of different ways over here on the left. Just like with statutes, on Lexis, you actually have to click into the other citing source material, which could include law reviews, treatises, statutes, etc. Another feature that you have on both Lexis and Westlaw is a table of authorities, and those are the cases or material cited by your case that you're looking at. So they're the cases, 7 of them, it's telling us, cited in Hodgkins v. Price. Okay, let's take a look very quickly at this same case on Westlaw. Okay, so this is the same Hodgkins case that we just saw on Lexis. We're getting a lot of the same features. We're getting a yellow flag telling us it's been distinguished. This is that negative treatment here if we clicked on this tab. We have a table authorities feature, which I mentioned. You have the same type of feature here on Westlaw, which are the sources that are within Hodgkins. And then we have the citing references, which give us cases, secondary sources, etc., which have cited to our case, Hodgkins v. Charles. Okay, so let's just look at the citing references. And you can see here they're grouped together, cases, secondary sources. So again, just like when we were on statutes, they group it together first. And let's just look at the cases themselves, and you'll see that on the left, if we're looking just at cases, instead of all the citing sources, we have additional features over on the left that we can limit by. So we still have the search within results, but we can also limit by jurisdiction, depth of treatment, date, etc. And there's this nice table format, which tells us what the case is. The one that's most negative is at the top, how much the depth of treatment is, etc. So lots of helpful information here. If there were particular head notes that the cases talked about, this is an older case, so we're not getting as much. But if there were particular head notes that Kirby talked about, it would also be listed here. So that's just a reminder of some of the key features that you could use Shepard's and KeyCite for cases and statutes. And that's the end of this video.